the subcommittee of the whole on supply resumes. I think, yes, the minister is going to respond to the honourable member from Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member opposite, I apologize. This is why I asked for the clock at the beginning. I honestly didn't realize that the clock was running out. So looking at the conversation, I don't know if I remember the specific detail of the question, but in essence around funding towards Elizabeth Fry as it relates to the housing initiative that took place during the first wave of the pandemic. So I guess the context around that initiative when it took place, I think is relevant to where we're at kind of now. And that initiative as it took place was specifically around the COVID response and what was going on at that time. It was multi-departmental and it did rely on not infrastructure at Elizabeth Fry, but I believe in hotel-based environments and space. So I think there are a multitude of factors when the funding for that wrapped up. Obviously, the pandemic status, the epidemiology, and so forth, all has evolved as well. And so as the multiple departments looked and evaluated and came up with some decisions, what the decision actually was not simply a no, but rather an acknowledgement of how there may be value in these types of services on a go-forward basis. But if we're going to look at them on a go-forward basis, we need to look at them in a sustainable way and not simply in a short-term context. So work is I think still evaluating, looking at that, and as we do with lots of other services and programs that we're trying to accomplish. As I said earlier, it's not just about, and many people assume that our justice system is about punishment. You know, the whole theory of crime and punishment, and in fact, that's not what modern justice is about. That justice is about more than that, and indeed rehabilitation and reintegration into society. Our ultimate goal is to have people. So as I've said, and I think there might be a little differentiation on the funding. I think the department believes that there was an increase in funding, although some of it pulls it together. I believe there's an increase to allow for an increase in the number of beds from I believe it was about 8 to 10 or 11 beds. So, I mean, if you do that on a per bed capacity, then you're looking at a 20-30% increase that went to. So again, I think in the main chamber, the speaker would argue that perhaps we have a disagreement of fact here in terms of the interpretation of that funding. But it's also important that how this conversation takes place too is, I think, because there are so many funding sources, and I think the member actually highlighted, and I thank her for highlighting that because it's something I personally am passionate about, especially from previous departments where we have lots of community organizations that we're funding, is streamlining the funding process because the administrative burden actually for the people who are doing the great work that we rely on them to do in community, in these community organizations, and this isn't just a justice, I think this is more broad than that. If we can take down some of those barriers and get more sustainable, and that's why, back to the specific question, we're so focused on looking at what the sustainable solution to the policy objective we're pursuing is. So I think there's a certain degree of agreement on the policy in principle. Timing and specifics is where we're perhaps at a different point at this point in time.
Thank you, Minister. Before I recognize the honourable member from Dartmouth South, I'm wondering if the Ms. Lawrence Craft would mind taking over as chair. I have a few questions I want to ask in the main chamber. The member from Dartmouth South goes until 3:38, and then that will be turned over to the member from Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River, and the next break is at 3:50, but I should be back before then.
Millbrook, Truro, Salmon River?
Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, it's going to be the member from Inverness.
Oh, Okay, there it's going to be the member from Inverness. I'm
At
sorry.
3:38.
Yes, and I apologize to the member from Dartmouth South. I'll let you ask your question now, and Ms. Lotus
Thank
Cross
you.
will take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess just to reiterate the question that I was asking before the break, and I see the former minister here who will be very familiar with my pestering as it relates to funding for Elizabeth Bryan Holly House. But just to reiterate, my question was about that sustainable conversation that you once again alluded to at the very end of your remarks. What does that look like? Who are you talking to? Is the province considering a community-based bail program? Who's at the table? Who are you talking to briefly, if possible? Because I'd like to move on to some other things.
Thanks. Sorry about that. My specific comment
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair. Yes, my specific comment was in reference to my personal mindset and approach and desires. I've only been in for a couple of months, so I can't say that I've initiated or taken steps down that path. I was talking more broadly in conceptually how I try to operate and try to streamline, because I think it is advantageous for our partners, but also for our organization as well. And government proper. So it is something I've been passionate about, and I did have some success at the Department of Health in streamlining some of that work there. It's not perfect, but I continuous improvement.
The member for Dartmouth South. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess just I have one more question in this area, but I would say, I think as I said before the break, I know that there are conversations going on in corrections around a provincial bail program. The last I heard, there were no women serving organizations at that table. My hope would be that if they're not already, that they could be. And so we often see in lots of our provincial departments that we, in the world, that we design things around men and then we adapt them to women. And I am hoping that we don't do that here. So we are hoping that we can come up with a streamlined, clear, compassionate community bail program for provincial jails, and that can happen collaboratively with the most diverse group of stakeholders. But moving on, I just want to flag for the minister, I'm guessing you don't have a response, but if the minister does, that's great, that we've discovered recently that the Metro Regional Housing Authority, and I'm not sure about the rest of Housing Nova Scotia, but for MRHA, their guidelines say that tenants shall not use their unit for the purposes of meeting bail conditions, house arrest, other legal proceedings without prior written permission of the property manager. As you can imagine, that permission is rarely granted. Placing those kind of barriers means that our provincial jails become homeless shelters. And if you talk to a lot of folks who are working on the front lines, they will say that this is happening, even people within corrections, because given the housing shortage, given these restrictive conditions on public housing, people have nowhere to go. And so even if they have been arrested for a relatively minor infraction and are awaiting trial, and we know there are delays, they can't get out. And so I'm wondering if the minister could briefly comment on whether he's had a conversation with his colleagues in housing or if he could. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this point, again, as the member knows, we've been quite busy the last month or so since we've transitioned on budget and legislative duty. So that I haven't had conversations specifically or directly with my colleague. But yes, there are obviously, as I've mentioned in our previous conversation, about broadly speaking, from a justice perspective, housing. It's something we became, particularly acutely aware during the COVID pandemic, particularly in the first wave. So that's, obviously, as I've said, something we are working on as government, and we're trying to tackle and pull down barriers in services that cross multiple departments. So those types of conversations, I think, happen at the staff and ministerial level, perhaps, I would say, more seamlessly today than they did even 7 years ago, 8 years ago when I first came into government. And also work with corrections and the housing commission as well. And again, having these conversations. But again, we really started this work about a year ago in the short-term context of a COVID response. But what we learned from that and took from that was the need. So again, on the scheme of things, it's relatively new, but work ongoing.
Yeah. I recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thanks. And I want to just take a moment to thank your staff. This is a strange estimates period because usually we see everyone in the room, but we only have a window to the minister. So thank you to all the department staff who are there and tuning in. I want to ask something related to a bill that we brought in, but also an issue that we've heard a lot about, which is the fact that our Municipal Elections Act does not permit incarcerated people to vote, which is in direct contravention of the Supreme Court of Canada. So the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in 2002 that not giving incarcerated people the right to vote was a violation of their charter rights, provided they're 18 years and older. But our Municipal Election Act doesn't permit that. It's an easy legislative fix. It's one we've asked for. That act has been opened up in the last couple of years, and that fix was not made. And so I'm wondering if the minister can tell us why and if and when the department intends to make that fix.
Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, as the member noted, was a question pertaining to Municipal Elections Act. I believe that act falls under the Municipal Affairs. It's not the Nova Scotia Elections Act that falls under my purview and Elections Nova Scotia.
The member for Dartmouth South.
Well, I see the Minister of Municipal Affairs here on the line, so hopefully he'll have time to do some preparation and to answer that question. But, you know, of course, the Department of Justice, your Department of Justice would provide a legal opinion on that. I'm assuming that opinion would be in line with the Supreme Court of Canada. So we would hope to see a change there. In particular, I just want to note that, you know, this government is making a commitment to equity. And, you know, hopefully we'll have time to get into later the disproportionate makeup of the folks in prison, but we know that they tend to, you know, Indigenous and Black people tend to be very overrepresented in those environments. And so this is an equity issue as much as it's a charter issue. And to that end, I just want to again raise the issue of the video that was released a couple of weeks ago from Burnside that appears to have been taken by a corrections staff there, ridiculing an inmate who has their medical needs and clearly identifying that woman. And when I asked about this, I was told that there will be an investigation. And so I'm going to ask the minister again if the results of that investigation will be made public so that we can deal with the kind of underlying systemic issues that allow something like that to happen.
Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a particular circumstance that is perhaps more complex than what it might appear on the surface when it comes to investigating and so forth. To the specific question of information that gets released as part of the report. This is a unionized environment, so there are aspects that tie us in and around workplace and workplace issues and so forth that trigger again privacy and things in that context. Obviously, there's privacy, certainly as it relates to individuals in the video and beyond, and how things transpired. And we know that the Privacy Office has initiated an independent review from that privacy lens there. You know, so there are a lot of complexities. So I can't comment now as to whether the substance in part or in full get released publicly until I see what the final results of a report are. Because anything that gets released publicly, what I have to say is that it has to adhere to those privacy components as well, and other legislation that may be in place here. So I can't, I know it's what the member wants, but I can't blanket say that the investigation report will be blanket released. What I can say, and I think my track record shows when I've in other departments had reviews and stuff, I do make information as best I can be implemented, and that work, at minimum, information about the report and findings, but I can't say that the report itself is released because of all those other privacy things that might override such a thing, and I don't know the answer to that until I see the actual report.
I recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Certainly, we will be making the same request of the union, and we would not want to violate anyone's privacy, but we want to learn from what happened. And while it is an isolated incident, it also reflects, we believe, some pretty serious systemic issues. So I will take the minister at his word that, what is able to be shared will be shared, not just with us, but with kind of relevant front-facing organizations who kind of can help to unpack and untangle and fix, hopefully, some of those systemic issues. I just want to go back. We were talking earlier about the number of people in our provincial jails, particularly in Burnside, which borders my constituency. It's in Dartmouth North, who are on remand. And I wonder if the minister can provide an update of the percentage of people in provincial jails currently who are there on remand, awaiting trial, not convicted.
Minister, I'd just like to let you know that you can take some time to think about your response. You don't have to. It's a little different where you normally would stand up and then you would be recognized. So please feel comfortable taking a little bit of time. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think most of the colleagues on here would suggest that I take lots of time in my response. So I try to be efficient in getting to the microphone. So,
I understand.
notwithstanding that point, the member's question, Madam Chair, was the number of people in custody. So I know the specific question was remand. In custody is 377, 276 are on remand. So I didn't do the math. I think the question was the percentage. I hope the member can do the division. I just didn't do the percentage.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Well, I'm going to take a page out of my colleague from Dartmouth North's playbook here, and I'm going to divide 276 by 377, and I'm going to get to 73%. So 73% of the people in our provincial correctional facilities have not been convicted of a crime. And, we know anecdotally that lots of those folks are there for a breach or what most people would consider minor. So we are hopeful that number will decrease, and that there will be an opportunity for people to the minister's point. I think the aspiration is certainly for the correctional environment to be rehabilitative, but we've got a long way to go. That is not the experience of the vast majority of people who find themselves there. And so until we can either radically change our system or create the kind of aspirational situation that the minister is referring to, I think our best hope is for some kind of community-based release situation where the public is safe, where people are safe, where they have access to the services they need. We know that, particularly when we're talking about criminalized women, most of them, the vast majority of them, are survivors of trauma and abuse and need wraparound supports. And it is rare that they can get those supports in the full measure when they are, in fact, incarcerated. So hopefully that percentage goes down. I want to move on to a couple questions about policing. We're all in the COVID time warp, but sometime in the last couple of years, we were pleased to see the government change the time frame, and I think the minister referred to this in his opening comments, to synchronize the complaint time between the RCMP and police, particularly because we have these joint forces. And this was in response, of course, to the case of Carrie Lowe, who went public after she couldn't bring a complaint, and it became very difficult. We had put in a legislative proposal around this, and so we were really glad to see the government bring it in. But one part of our legislative proposal where the change wasn't made was around the issue of discoverability. So we have a Discoverability Act, which basically means all those timeframes that run, and I'm not explaining this to the minister, I'm just saying this as part of my question, but the timeframes that run, in most statutes in Nova Scotia run from the time that the issue was discovered. But that is not the case in the Police Act. In the Police Act, it runs from the time that the incident occurred. And the problem with that is, for someone like Carrie Lowe, she did not know that there was a miscarriage of justice until after such time as her limitation period would have elapsed. And so one of our requests was to add the principle of discoverability into the Police Act. So the timeframes have been synchronized, and that's good. That's a positive change. But those timeframes should run from the time when a person who feels themselves to have been wronged is alerted of that. Because often, I don't, just from my own limited dealings with law enforcement, like if you have an issue and you contact law enforcement, then the response, which is justified in lots of circumstances, is let me take that away and we're going to look into it and we're going to investigate and we'll keep you apprised as needed. So as a complainant, you don't have a window into what's happening in your case. And so if there is a miscarriage, it may be a long time before you discover that. So it's a long preamble, but I wonder if the minister can comment on whether that change is still being contemplated, and if not, why not?
The Honourable Minister. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for the question and the context for our colleagues. So I won't delve into there. Suffice to say, I think there's 2 points to be made in response to the inquiry. The first is, if the change around discoverability in the police complaints process, as the member has advocated for, was to be made, then the provisions would no longer be synchronized between the different policing agencies, the RCMP being a federal force where the complaints process and so forth is managed there. So if we were to make that change, it would apply only to the municipal policing forces, and it would not apply to the RCMP. So we would no longer be in synchronization. So I just wanted to be cognizant of that point. The other thing that I think that the member may not have noted about the language that did get updated and the way that we're actually structured, although she's correct, Madam Chair, in her description of time periods of when the incident occurs versus when you're aware of the incident, I want to present another scenario where in either of those cases, whether the incident occurred when a victim or an applicant may have become aware of a wrong, in some instances, the individual may have context where even with awareness, they might be traumatized or have other factors that may still prevent them from launching a complaint within that time period. What we actually have in our updated, which went into effect in January, provisions actually gives the Police Complaints Commissioner the discretion to waive and take into account the individual circumstances and context and define or take on. So in other words, I guess my point is the language and so forth in there around the timing is not hard and fast and restrictive in the way it once was. So it does provide that flexibility and provisions to take into context, which would go even further than what was proposed by the member around that time period. I think we just believe that the flexibility addresses that concern when it would be applicable to the Commission.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for that thoughtful answer. And I think the problem with discretion is that it's discretionary. So I think it's a good provision. I'm glad it's there, but it's highly subjective. And so I would just urge the Minister, to the extent that it's possible, to work with his federal counterparts to make those changes concurrently, so that it is harmonized and that it is fairer, because trauma is one thing and it's important. It doesn't always overlap with this discoverability issue. So we'll continue to advocate for that, but I do appreciate the context and the information. I've asked the Minister about a public review of policing services. So I think in addition to the terrible anniversary that we will be marking this weekend, there's been other issues around the RCMP in the last year. I think we talked about it a little bit in the chamber. There were raids conducted in Dartmouth and Halifax that weren't coordinated with local policing. And there's seems to be a little bit of an upswell of question around our policing contracts and a policing review. I'm wondering, again, whether the Minister will commit to a review of policing services, just so that we can kind of have a sense of, where we are in terms of provincial policing and where we want to go.
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I'll try to. Sorry. We get so engaged, we forget you're there. Thank you for the question. I think, as was noted prior to assuming my role and responsibility as the Minister of Justice, my predecessor did note, and I think it's consistent with the work of any minister in any department, doing some work internally to evaluate within our policing services. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, policing services, public safety, policing services, those an area of responsibility, one of many areas. And within that context, establishing a an internal evaluation and seeing what do things look like. That information internally helps inform us as to what we do more broadly and so forth. And it's just part of, I think, regular operational processes as we would look at other parts of and areas of services that we provide to say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? Where we fit into our objectives. My mandate makes it very clear. Justice plans around Indigenous and African Nova Scotian justice plans that set the stage forward. And so I have to do this work with the department to evaluate and analyze what's currently in place and what's the strategic direction or priorities of where we're going to go into the future. And that internal analysis, that step that was initiated by my predecessor, is underway now. Where that will go to the members' question in terms of a public review or what have you, should be very clear. We do have, as the member mentioned, contracts provincially with the RCMP. There are contractual provisions in there when one talks about a contractual review or a review under the contractual terms. So there are very specific provisions and context that kind of review stipulates. At this point, as I said, we're in a preliminary stage of just departmental continuous improvement, analyzing policing, just as we do in any other part of the work that we do as a department, to evaluate.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you. With all due respect, I do think that the issues that have been raised around the RCMP in the last year in this province are public issues and they concern public safety. And I think, therefore, that any review needs to be public. I understand that we have contracts, but I also understand that your predecessor was a lifetime RCMP member. And there have been questions raised about, the ability to undertake that kind of review as minister when understandably, you have been a part of a force for the majority of your career. So I just want to kind of put a fine point on this request for a public review. Of course, I would certainly hope that the department would be internally reviewing policing services all the time. That makes sense. That's important. But, the public has a lot of questions. And, we are not demanding a specific action of any kind, but we are asking for a public review, both in terms of resource allocation and taxpayer dollars, public safety, all of the goals that we have around public safety and policing. We want to understand how those are being achieved for Nova Scotians, given our current system and given the public challenges that have been identified. And so we would continue to ask for a fully public review. Moving on, our caucus filed an FOI for documents and correspondence related to tickets and fines under the Health Protection and Emergency Management Act. So those are sort of the COVID tickets that have been given out. And the information we received included an email from April of 2020. So that would have been probably from your predecessor, stating that the minister was concerned about police targeting marginalized communities based on anecdotal stories. In response, which we think is great, the department began tracking the summary offense tickets in what they refer to as marginalized communities, which I think include many of our historically African Nova Scotian communities. So those included North End Dartmouth, North End Halifax, Preston and Cherrybrook, and then also Millbrook and Eskasoni, which, as we know, are First Nations communities. At that time, with an HRM, tickets issued in Cherrybrook and Preston and North Dartmouth and North Halifax made up 22% of the health protection tickets that were issued in the province. And so in light of that, I'm wondering if the minister can explain what, if any, steps were taken to address concerns that racialized communities may have been targeted in enforcement. We appreciate keeping track of those tickets by location, but certainly we see in larger jurisdictions like Ontario massive concerns around this, not just around enforcement, but also around vaccination and other things. So we want to be aware of the racialized dimensions of this pandemic. And so I'm wondering what response came from the department.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just, I want to take just a quick moment back to the inquiry piece, just to put the final dot on that first. I guess to the member's point, and I think this was a response earlier in this session with the previous member asking questions, and I didn't include it in my response, but there is also a public inquiry ongoing. And one of the terms of reference of that inquiry, which is public, which is independent, and which does span policing services in the province, is underway. And so there is a public review underway that is independent and separate from us. And that is one of the terms and conditions around the public review pertaining to the mass casualty event from last year. So as the member noted in the question and the context of it and in the response was about it being a public safety issue, and that's exactly what that public inquiry is evaluating. And I would just like to make just one other point that was brought up, and just in response to, I can appreciate the member's reference to my predecessor who initiated the internal work and his previous career. But I do take a little bit of exception to the suggestion on, and I appreciate and understand the language was that questions being raised about his ability to perform his duties based upon a previous career. Knowing my colleague, I can assure the member and all members here in the public, Madam Chair, that he is a man of character and integrity. By all accounts, people I've bumped into who have known my colleague in his previous career speak about his commitment to the people of Nova Scotia and Canada, and indeed service that he provided on behalf of Canada internationally and through I believe some UN initiatives. There's absolutely nothing in my colleague's track record that should raise question or concern about his integrity and capacity and willingness to fulfill his duties and service to the people of Nova Scotia, either in his past career or in his current career. And I would also highlight and stress, as it relates specifically to his tenure as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General for the province of Nova Scotia, he did engage with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. I believe he's publicly reported on the fact that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner has himself clearly delineated the fact that his previous career in no way represents an actual, or nor should it, a perceived conflict of interest. So while I appreciate the member's comment was not specific, suggesting herself, Madam Chair, that there was a conflict, merely raising the point that there were questions, I just wanted to be on the record, because merely stating the fact that there were questions without putting the context around the fact that those questions would be unfounded, and in fact that the member took the appropriate steps and also is an honorable member of the legislature. And indeed, I don't think he needed to be appointed to executive council to earn that honor. I think his distinguished career in law enforcement on behalf of Nova Scotians and the country, he earned that title long before he joined executive council. So that's just final comments or thoughts on that point. As it relates to the specific question here on the COVID public health summary offense tickets, as the member noted, we did review the data. The analysis did not find any indication or trends that would suggest that there was any targeting in marginalized populations or communities.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South. You have about 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the minister. And I've been the justice critic for 4 years, and so I know the former minister pretty well in that role, and was not impugning his ability to do his job. It was only in reference to specifically, the notion of that inquiry that questions had been raised. But I appreciate your comments. And to that, in fact, the former minister mentioned before he departed his role that this was an appropriate time, and we appreciated this comment, that this was an appropriate time to revisit and determine the role police play in responding to mental health calls. This has also been an issue this year. We've heard 2 Nova Scotia police chiefs say that they also have concerns about whether or not their officers are properly equipped to deal with mental health crisis. And so I'm wondering, and I know the minister probably has a view on this from his former department as well, what options are being considered by the department as alternatives? And is there money in this budget allocated to solve this issue?
I recognize the honourable minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for this very important question. And in fact, I think this is roughly where we left off with the previous member questions. That question was specifically about officers responding to mental health in hospital settings, where I think the member's question now is in a community setting. But in my earlier response, what I highlighted is a recognition of both. And as the member duly noted, my previous role, I think, suits very well to this opportunity, but it is very early stages. And I appreciate the specific question about money in the budget to solve this issue. I think there are many complexities around this issue. We look at it from the lens of the police agencies and engaging, but I think the reason the system has evolved for police services to respond is because of the question of public safety and the role and responsibility of public safety when an individual represents potentially a risk to harm to themselves or somebody else. That's the public safety aspect rather than really the mental health piece. And I know that's where the question and the conversations go down. The police agency saying we're not mental health experts, we shouldn't be the ones responding to a mental health crisis situation, but they're not responding as the mental health interventionist, they're responding as the public safety component. So if I just for a moment flip that scenario on its head and say, okay, police are theoretically or hypothetically, the police are not the appropriate entities, it's a public health, a mental health situation. So we send public health, mental health experts into the situation, but the situation at the time is a safety one. The individual represents harm. Those mental health professionals, while they have the mental health training and expertise for interventions, they don't have the public safety components to keep themselves and others necessarily safe. And that's why this is such a complex situation to find out how we can best respond. So what I can say is I think I have a fair understanding conceptually of the challenge and of the perspectives of the employees, both on the mental health services side, on the police services side, of advocates, and those. It's a challenge sometimes for those individuals suffering from mental health crises, particularly of such an acute nature. But those who are advocating on their behalf. Perspective in these situations, and I don't have the solutions. I don't know that it's necessarily always dollars to the member's question if we need budget to solve the problem, but we do need work and we need attention, and we are in the early stages of it, of looking at it. And again, I believe from my past career role, well positioned to participate in the justice system to try to find a path forward.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you for the answer. I know my time is running short. The budget question was more to point to a specific initiative. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some of those come forward soon. quickly, if I can, in the time left, I want to ask, last September, the former premier, the member for Annapolis, as he is now known, issued a public apology for systemic racism. And at that time, he announced a design team that would reimagine the justice system in Nova Scotia. We're 6 months into the mandate of that team, and I was wondering if the minister can provide an update on that work.
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the member for this important question. As the member knows, a lot has changed in the province and the government since last September. What I can assure the member and all of our colleagues, Madam Chair, is that tackling systemic racism, I'll refer to my opening remarks as to how important this is, that I wanted to highlight it myself. It exists, highlight right up to our current premier, which I think is a continuation of our previous premier, and this government's commitment to tackle these issues. Mandate letters, many of them, including my own as the Minister of Justice, to advance African Nova Scotian and Indigenous justice plans that are really designed to target the reform that's needed in our justice system to tackle those systemic barriers. As I think, I guess I summarize it as this: our justice system has far too little representation of many communities in the legal profession, and far overrepresented in
Time has lapsed for the NDP party. We will turn it over to the Progressive Conservative Party. And I recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness. You have about just under 12 minutes before our COVID break.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Thank you, Minister, for having the opportunity here this afternoon. My questions are related to your role as Minister responsible for the Elections Act for the coming year. And the question I have is around proclamation of the bill that was passed a year ago around changes made to the Elections Act, which was Bill 225. Does that remain unproclaimed? Is there a plan to proclaim that legislation?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank the member for the question. The changes have not been proclaimed. I believe the bill notes that it goes into effect on proclamation of Executive Council or Governor and Council, I believe is the proper terminology there. And that's work to move forward is underway. So I expect to have some updates not too distant future when we wrap here in the legislature.
I recognize the member for Inverness.
Thank you, Minister. And I know, typically when a bill passes, in most cases, they're proclaimed right away. Why has it not been proclaimed? I guess the problem it presents for Elections Nova Scotia is that they're potentially looking at down the road at having to conduct an election under two different sets of rules, depending on whether or not the legislation is proclaimed. So why the delay and why I don't know if it's confusion. There's no confusion, but why the delay and why put Elections Nova Scotia in a position where they have to prepare to run an election under two sets of conditions?
I recognize the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess just contextually, as I noted, the proclamation is by Governor and Council, so I can't necessarily speak to the specific context of decisions of Executive Council in that regard. to this or any other specific item that obviously may broach the executive privilege and my duty to maintain that confidence of that body. Suffice to say, one can, and in addition to that, I also was not a member of Executive Council for a significant period of time between the legislation being passed in the legislature and certainly the fall into the winter when perhaps it might have been anticipated to be proclaimed. So I as a citizen and a member of the legislature, I would have had no line of sight on any conversations or decisions that may have taken place at that time anyway. Suffice to say, prior to that point in October when I stepped down as Minister of Health and Wellness, I guess one of the things that happened was COVID, where really all hands on deck throughout government, responding to COVID pandemic. That was our first and foremost priority across all areas of government. So that would take care of the time predominantly during the spring and the summers. We prepared for the second wave. And as I said, I stepped down, was not in Executive Council during the fall and early winter period. I am here now. I am the minister responsible. And I am taking it very seriously to ensure that the appropriate provisions to bring it forward to my colleagues and have Executive Council make some decisions at that point.
I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, I do know you've had a busy year in the leadership race there, and I can certainly see how that would be the case. But this is certainly the biggest, I mean, in terms of being responsible for that act, this would be probably the top item for the minister responsible for this act coming into this House sitting, and I'm sure that it's been on your radar, and I guess my concern is that, is it really fair for the government to be holding back on legislation that it passed itself, which gives the government an advantage? Only the government knows right now which set of rules the election is going to be conducted under, and the government could theoretically choose the set of rules that serves itself in this situation, instead of being open and transparent and proceeding with the legislation that was passed a year ago. So from a fairness perspective, do you feel it's fair for the government to be holding back on this and essentially having the opportunity to know what set of rules the election will be conducted under?
I recognize the honourable minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess perhaps I would ask if the member has any specific provisions within the variance between the current legislation and what was passed last year that may be considered to potentially provide an advantage or disadvantage to any of the participants in the electoral process. Without looking at it right now in front of me, the member is correct that I've certainly been an active file on my desk to delve in. And part of that included, given the time when I came in, to have the conversation, correspondence, and have staff engage with Elections Nova Scotia to determine where we're at now. We know with certainty that there must be an election within roughly 1 year from now. So given the scenario that I enter into as the minister responsible, the first step, obviously for me, is to have the conversation with the department and Elections Nova Scotia to see if proclamation is even viable at this point in time to ensure those conversations and engagements taking place. But as far as fairness, or if there's any, as I think, Madam Chair, the member's alluding or suggesting, stacking the deck, so to speak, I'm not aware of any provisions in there that might provide any advantage or disadvantage. This is predominantly about modernizing and providing some administrative changes to support the Elections Nova Scotia, themselves. So if the member has specific aspects in there that he thinks may be advantageous to proclaim or not proclaim, I certainly aren't aware of them. So I can definitely assure the member that that concept has never even crossed my mind. I never even thought of it as a possible thing. So I haven't looked at the legislation with that lens. The member obviously seems to have. If he's suggesting there are pieces, I'd be happy to hear what those provisions are.
I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Madam Chair, we have a government passing a bill in the legislature. It's proclaimed every other bill except for this one. It's causing headaches for Elections Nova Scotia, which is the organization that is that has no skin in the political game. They just want to conduct a fair election. They are concerned about this. They've approached me months ago about this, wondering why isn't this legislation proclaimed? It's certainly a fair question to ask. The minister is claiming confidential cabinet confidentiality, that he can't really speak on it. He's also saying that he hasn't really maybe been there when it was discussed because he has been busy the past year and was not in the executive council for a period of time. But coming to the House this spring with an election in the offing very soon, within the next year, Minister, I find it incredibly strange that the government remains undecided on whether or not it's going to proclaim legislation it passed. Can you explain why that is?
I recognize the honourable minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I previously noted, I can't speak for a period of time when I was not there to contemplate as it relates to the proclamation of this legislation during my tenure. As I've indicated, one of the first steps through my transition into the role, this is a topic that I delved into very early on, pulled the information necessary together. One of those components was to have staff engage in the conversation with Elections Nova Scotia to determine whether or not I need to know at this point in time. Again, I can't speak to previous points in time. At this point in time, if it's viable to move forward and proclaim, or if there would be barriers if it was to be proclaimed. And that guidance to me is coming from Elections Nova Scotia. So again, if I was to be advised by Elections Nova Scotia that proclamation now or before the next election was to be burdensome and a barrier to their ability to safely and successfully and in an unbiased way to administer the election, that would certainly be information I would have to bring forward to Executive Council, Governor and Council when making the decision. So again, I've been here a few weeks. That was those conversations and engagement taking place. And again, I will be guided in the information I bring forward by that independent body, Elections Nova Scotia, as to proclamation of this particular bill.
I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Madam Chair, one of the barriers for Elections Nova Scotia is the fact that the legislation was passed but has not yet been proclaimed. Is the minister concerned that Elections Nova Scotia is concerned that this legislation has yet to be proclaimed?
I recognize the honourable minister. Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing, again, in terms of the time, and I know the members alluding and suggesting in terms of how much time has elapsed, which is about a year from when it was passed to this point in time. The thing that the members here, Madam Chair, yourself and others should be aware of is that, in fact, even if this legislation had been proclaimed upon royal assent, that is immediately upon passing.
Order, order. It's time for our COVID break, and hold those thoughts, Minister, and the honourable member for Inverness, and we'll return at 4:05. And I think Mr. Bain is back. He may, are you going to take over? Okay, thank you. See you at 4:05.
The subcommittee of the whole on supply resumes. We left off with the member from Inverness. He had to step out, but I believe the minister has a response, and after the response, I'll recognize the member from Truro Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River. The minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I believe I think I've already answered the question. I'll try again. As I indicated when I came into office just a few weeks ago, this was one of the important files that was brought to my attention that I dug into, that I reviewed. Asked for contact with Elections Nova Scotia
to. Sorry about that. I had to jump on and chair the meeting and unexpected.
Thank you. So with the engagement that took place, again, asking staff to reach out, because one of the most important things, Mr. Chair, to me, in my role and responsibility, before bringing information forward to Executive Council, Governor and Council, is to ensure that what I'm bringing forward is achievable. And so I had to inquire and make sure if this proclamation, given the fact at that point when I came into office, we are roughly within a year of an election taking place. If that presented problems or issues, that conversation with staff and Election Nova Scotia taking place. And then, of course, there's the administrative process to move forward with any item that gets brought forward to Executive Council for consideration. And again, as the legislation stipulates, Governor and Council will make a decision with the information. But again, at the heart of this legislation, as was the case for, as I'm sure the members would remember, the legislation itself, when it was brought forward to the legislature, was really informed by the commission and the review and so forth. This is not legislation that is really government legislation. This is nonpartisan, passed unanimously, and is going through, as I said, in my context, review, but guided by Election Nova Scotia and ultimately my colleagues at Governor and Council to make that final decision on time.
I recognize the member for Truro Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River, with 45 minutes left for the PC caucus. The member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, through the chair. I'd like to ask just a couple questions around the provincial courthouses in Truro, both aging locations, and I had previous communication with the previous minister, and he put in a letter that there was a strategic development plan for the courthouses across the province. And I guess my first question to that is Truro in that strategic plan and as part of the budget?
The Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the member. I think this is our first time having an opportunity to engage through the chair. So welcome to estimates. As it relates to the review that I believe my predecessor was referring to, that was an infrastructure review process being started and initiated, encompassing the entire court system. So really all infrastructure being assessed and contemplated through that. As the member knows, and I know this is likely a frustrating response, but with COVID, a lot of initiatives would take a bit of a pause to redirect the energy and focus on the needs to ensure that, again, in this third branch, the court system, are able to conduct themselves, carry on their business, maintain the justice role, the important role, third branch of government, independent of our legislative and executive branches to do their work. Where the priorities have shifted, obviously, is maintaining and operationalizing infrastructure and other tools to enable those in the judicial branch through the courts to conduct their business on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia safely in light of COVID. So there hasn't been much progress with that initiative over the past year, as many of the individuals doing this work, both within the department and other departments like infrastructure, that would be part and parcel of doing this work, but also those within the courts and the judiciary obviously have been very, very busy ensuring that they have appropriate resources, space, both virtual and physical, to continue their operations safely in a COVID pandemic. But the work broadly is still on the books. To your specific question of money, I don't believe there's funding specifically for the Truro Courthouse in this budget, which would show up, I believe, probably as a part of the capital plan, if there had been.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for the kind welcome. I appreciate that. Again, just on the courthouse issue, I don't know if you've seen the media article there. I guess it'd be a couple months ago now, around holding cells, and obviously COVID has played a challenging. Has challenges, I guess, with respect to our court system. This one in particular is the one on Prince Street, the provincial courthouse, and there's pictures in the media of a bus holding I don't know, clients, let's say, on a bus with the sheriff department. Very unsafe, and it was due to overloaded or overcrowded cells at the local municipal police station, as well as there was no holding capacity at the local courthouse. So hence why the urgency around the courthouse and the infrastructure on Prince Street. It used to be Snook's Save Easy, used to be a grocery store, and I just see we're centrally located again. We're in the hub, right in the middle. We're probably the second, maybe even second is what the judge had told me in case volume, as well as we have a Supreme Court in a 130-year-old municipal building uptown. So again, it comes back to safety, public safety in general, and modernization, and they're really concerned for safety. There's one trial there. It was a federal trial, or it was a murder trial in the Supreme Court, that the sheriff department didn't feel safe taking the prisoner up those flights of stairs to get him into the courtroom. So they had to call the Truro police to come in and look after it. And that's a little bit alarming as well. So again, it comes back to aging buildings, safety, overloads in cells, having to hold clients, I'm going to call them, on a bus. Just very unsafe and not modern. And I just really would like the minister just to reply to those two items. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the member for, I think, several points that came up there. So I'll do my best to make sure I speak to them all. If I miss some, please, my apologies in advance. There was a lot there. I guess first, as it relates to the scenario with the bus that was referenced, my understanding from staff in that context was that there were no inmates there, that the scenario or the circumstance where that transpired was a matter of, as I've said earlier, as a result of COVID, not just in our courts, but in all aspects of our society, public health limits on the number of people allowed inside, in particular, in space. So as you can imagine, in a courthouse under normal, non-pandemic circumstances, people who show up for appearances, and these are not necessarily criminal appearances, but administrative appearances, could be a traffic violation or what have you, in court for appearances. You would be in the court building waiting to be called forward, and perhaps in the court itself, or in the hallway, or another space. With COVID, these individuals who show up on what they refer to as appearance day, kind of an administrative working the way through the system there, you would have a lot of people and scheduled to come in, and people show up before necessarily the scheduled time. So that particular bus was being used, as I understand it, for people who were able to wait. So think of it more as a waiting room, but not about offenders. So this is not, that space was not being used like a holding cell, but rather more akin, I believe, to a waiting room. So just in terms of the safety, security concerns that the member raised there on that particular instance. And so what, though, that image and that scenario, though, pointed out is the challenge with, particularly early on in the pandemic, with and as the courts were opening up more in light of the pandemic, how important scheduling was and is to maintain the safe, from a public health perspective, operation of the courthouse, scheduling to ensure that people don't get backed up, that people can transition, and appropriate sanitization or sterilization steps that get taken to clean the environment, and all of the work that's necessary to keep people safe. Staff, those showing for appearances, those who I believe you refer to as clients, but if they've been charged as offenders, would be, we want to keep them all safe. We want everybody to be safe, and that's what that process is. And I think another important thing to keep in mind as it relates to this whole environment and space is, as I mentioned briefly earlier, is remember there are three branches to government. I'm here today representing, in my role as a member of the executive branch, really the operational side of government. Colleagues here on the committee are here operating in their legislative capacity, which is to oversee and hold us in the executive branch accountable. But we sometimes forget that the judicial branch is the third branch of government. And so while there's overlap in so much as funding transfers through, gets approved, brought forward in the executive branch, gets approved by the legislative branch, funding for the judiciary and their operations flows through. But operationally, it's the judges are responsible for their courthouse space, and the chief judge oversees the overarching priorities and spaces within the entire judiciary position. Our department, and from an executive branch, we do provide administrative supports and flow through and obviously advocate for the funding that covers the operational costs necessary by the judicial branch. But again, those operational responsibilities, scheduling and so forth, and things do get administered by the judges and justices within the court system, independent of both the judicial, the executive and legislative branches. But we obviously have to work with them when they identify their priorities. And the member, Mr. Chair, made reference to aging and the need for modernization. And in fact, that is one of the things, not just in the justice system, but I think throughout society, there's been a huge jump forward in efforts to modernize many aspects of society and many services, and the judiciary, the judicial system is not exempt. And I made reference to it earlier. I won't take more of the members' time, but virtual courthouse proceedings and a number of initiatives that I referenced in my opening remarks have already taken place to support access to justice in Truro and across the province.
The member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Minister, for the answer. I am now going to pass it over to my colleague from Cumberland North. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Minister. I guess it's okay to talk directly. I'm just going to ask one question, and then I'm going to ask if it would be possible to follow up offline with whoever would be most appropriate in your department. And my question is around law enforcement and who would be responsible to ensure adequate staffing, specifically within RCMP. And I'm just going to share the reason I'm asking that question is there's been some concerns here in Cumberland with staffing and a large percentage of people being off sick or off leave and leaving the force understaffed. And then we're seeing that in particular, I had a victim who had reported a sexual assault and there had been no follow-up in 9 weeks. And it still was something like 16 weeks before charges were laid. So there is a concern about staffing and ratio. And I do have other questions in relation to sexual assault, Crown prosecutors and sexual assault cases, but I can ask those offline with whoever be most appropriate in your department. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for the question. And I appreciate the frustration. I'm assuming your constituent that you gave a brief example of a situation would be feeling, and those circumstances, because as I mentioned in my opening remarks, a lot of effort is being conducted to improve our response to sexualized violence throughout the system. So that is a priority, and we've made a lot of efforts, my predecessor and throughout other aspects of government. So I know those circumstances you've described is not reflective of the objective and the outcomes that we're pursuing as a government. And I think all members of the legislature share those objectives. We had lots of conversations about it. To your specific question of staffing within RCMP, we do have a contract with RCMP to provide provincial police services. Some municipalities also have a contract with RCMP to provide municipal policing services. But within that agreement, within the contracts and the way they're structured, the RCMP are a national force. They provide their staffing, as you say, ratios and so forth for the services that they deliver, in a given time. And I've just put one other piece, although I can't speak to the specific circumstance, so very much in a generality. The member made reference to length of time to filing charges. I would just put a little footnote, perhaps, that I don't think we can always make judgment calls about how long it would take to lay charges or whether charges do get laid in a particular situation. Because those decisions get made as they pursue investigation on the policing, and then come up with and determine the information, the evidence against the laws and so forth before making those decisions. And sometimes the evidence is clearer and more available, and charges can be laid more quickly, and sometimes. And again, I'm not speaking on the specific, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to draw conclusions based upon the duration to charges from a concern being raised.
Okay.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Minister. And in this particular case, it was there was a member that had been reported to was no longer there, and no one else had picked up the case. So there was a definite gap. But I'm going to pass it on to my colleague from Pictou West. Thank you, Minister.
I recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I know our time is limited, and I know I still have a colleague after me that wants to ask some questions. So thank goodness, most of my questions have been asked, whether or not by my colleagues or of the opposition party. So I'm going to just be quick and hope that we can get quick answers. So first question, the one that we were cut off the other day in question period, the detox center in Pictou. Quickly, an update of what's happening.
The Minister
Thanks,
of Justice.
Mr. Chair, there's no firm decisions around that property. As the member noted then and is well aware, it was being used as a health facility, no longer. There is a partner organization in the community that may have some use, that they provide some services to justice. So we're evaluating, and there's some work ongoing, but too early to say whether that will materialize or not. But we're certainly engaged in a potential use of the facility with a partner community organization providing services.
The honourable member.
Thank you. Is that the John Howard Society, Minister?
The honourable minister.
Sorry, just not to take more time, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to disclose the member, so not to take more time. I'll follow up and let you know. If I determine that I'm able to disclose the organization, I will follow up with you offline. Follow up with the member offline, Mr. Chair.
Member.
Thank you. Okay, just heading right into okay, I'm a firm believer. It's just my opinion that I believe all high schools that have X amount, I don't know if it would be 50 or 100, but definitely when you have a school of 1,200 kids from grades 9 to 12, they should have a resource officer. This was an initiative that I think was brought in by the NDP. So we had an RCMP officer at Northumberland Regional High School. Now I know he did share a bit of his time with a few other schools, but mostly at this school, because you can imagine 1,200 students, that's where the focus was. Increase in drugs, sexual assault, it's rampant. And this officer has been off for a year, with rightly so. I'm not questioning why the officer is off. I want to know why someone wasn't replaced, and I want to know when they are going to get replaced. So we've had a whole school year without an officer there.
Just, Mr. Chair, just very quickly, for the specific location, just to help inform, is that an RCMP or a municipal officer that the member is referring to at that site?
RCMP.
Mr. Chair, thank you to the member. I think on this particular one, Mr. Chair, I might want to connect with the member offline. Under normal circumstances, we'd certainly expect that a vacant resource would be filled. So I'm just not familiar with the specific site and location. So if we touch base offline, or you reach out to my executive assistant, I'm sure we can try to navigate that one and see what's going on specifically. Again, as I mentioned to the previous question, Staffing are the responsibility of the RCMP process. But again, if we have an allocated resource, they should be filling those positions. So something we can look into.
The member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with those two questions, I'm definitely going to hold the minister to get back in touch with me. They're very important to my constituents, two big issues that are really happening here right now. People worried about the detox center, what's happening with it. And I've never in my 8 years had so many calls from the high school with concerns with finding needles and drugs, and it's just rampant. So having the presence of an officer there doesn't solve everything, but it certainly helps having a presence. Okay, most of my questions about human trafficking have been answered. I know that all members of the House know that this is a very passionate area for me. Regardless of not being the critic for justice, I still remain very involved. And I just want to first, before I end with this last question, I do want to give a big shout out to the past minister from Bridgewater, to his staff. They were always very good to me. And I think they did a lot of work around this subject matter. And I am just so pleased. But I know they know, and I know the new minister knows there's still a lot of work to be done. Where I struggle is that 3 of the bills that I introduced that most people are aware, 2 I do believe were adopted into policy and regulations, and that's wonderful. I really don't care who gets the credit. Really the staff gets the credit and the past minister, which is great. But I'm really disappointed that my 3rd bill to make it mandatory education in the curriculum is not being addressed. And I will continue pushing that, but I want to know right now what the minister's department feels the reason is for still remaining to be the highest province with the highest reported human trafficking incidents. And if his department believes that actually implementing something in the educational system to make it mandatory to learn about this would help. Thank you.
The minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I'm going to jump back to the first of the 2 that I promised to follow up to the member with. Staff, it is okay to disclose. Yes, Mr. Chair, it is the John Howard Society that we're in discussions with for some services that they would be providing. So again, that work is ongoing, some assessments and things. So preliminary to make any kind of public announcements about what may occur, but I assure the member if things proceed and conclude, we'll do public notification announcement of the services and what have you. The specific question on the education, as far as being incorporated into curriculum, that obviously is something with the education department. That's not something that I would have the capacity to do mandating through, but it did come up actually a little bit earlier as well. So I did touch on that, and that I think, again, where and how education can play a role, not just around human trafficking, but other aspects of sexualized violence and systemic issues around that. And whether it's through formalized education system broadly in society, the need to get information age appropriately into the hands of our youth is really important to both keep them safe, but also to keep them from becoming engaged in inappropriate behaviors as well. So recognize that, and I think all members of the legislature support these outcomes. To the specific question about why Nova Scotia ranks high, I think this is information that we're still trying to tease apart and come to a full understanding of that. Preliminary, there's some things about geographic location, being port sited, close proximity, and the ease of transferring into the proximity of other jurisdictions, which once you cross boundaries, it makes it more difficult from a policing perspective. And that's one of the reasons why we try to work and focus, and I think work with our partners and try to connect, I hope to, with my Atlantic counterparts and federally as well, to try to recognize that when you get into human trafficking, it's not any individual jurisdiction. It in fact spans multiple jurisdictions, and we need to work together to solve the problem. Wherever the incident originates isn't the important part. I don't believe in this. It's that we tackle those issues, and part of it we need to do together to understand, but also to resolve. And again, this remains a high priority. It's outlined in my mandate letter, and will be, as my predecessor will continue to be, I think, and I appreciate the support that all members of the legislature and on all political parties, I think, share this objective, and that makes our job in the executive branch that much easier when we know we have the support of the legislative branch to make these tackle these complex and long-standing issues.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the minister for those answers, and we'll certainly be following up. Again, thanks to his department and the past minister, and I know the current minister has had a lot of responsibility with big portfolios, and I know he'll do a great job with this one too, and I look forward to working with him. So for now, I'll hand it over to my colleague, I think, who has about 10 minutes or 9, with oh my gosh, Argyle Barrington.
I recognize the honourable member for Argyle Barrington. You actually have 15 minutes left.
Oh, 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my colleague from Pictou West is correct. It is still Argyle Barrington, but hopefully next session it will be I'll be the member for Argyle. I guess I just have a couple short brief questions, and if I do have time, I'll pass it back to my colleague from Pictou West so she can continue her conversation with the minister. But I do want to take the moment to thank the minister for the opportunity to ask him a few questions this afternoon, and for his staff support during estimates here. The topic that I do want to discuss with the minister is probably one that he's familiar with due to his previous ministerial duties as Minister of Health, and coincides with his new portfolio, and it is the wellness courts in Nova Scotia. And I've heard lots of success from this program here, this sector of courts in our province, and there's a number of wellness courts in Nova Scotia. Dartmouth, Halifax, Sydney, Amherst, Kentville, Port Hawkesbury, Bridgewater, Wagmatcook First Nation, but there's none in southwestern Nova Scotia. It's a very big region. If you go from Kentville to Bridgewater, that a big demographic of our provinces is being missed here. Recognizing that the situations that may lead Nova Scotians to end up getting in trouble with the law, whether it be and complexed with mental illness, substance abuse, and gambling, and that they'd fit into the criteria to go through the courts through a different means. I'm lost for words, I guess, of why we don't have this court yet here in southwestern Nova Scotia. I know it's 2 years ago the program celebrated its 10th anniversary. I've written to the previous minister. I've spoken with the minister offline at the time. So I'm just wondering, what are the barriers to getting wellness court in the Tri-County region, and what is being done to ensure that it's going to be implemented in due time?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank the member for the question. In fact, I can advise the member. In fact, our colleague from Yarmouth also inquired recently about this very same question. And there's a couple of things. One is obviously agree it's not there, but also agree that the services and the outcomes that we're seeing in Nova Scotia, I think, being a leader in the adoption and the success. I made reference to this earlier, Mr. Chair, but I'll do it again. That our justice system isn't just about crime and punishment. It's about really the overall objective to rehabilitate. And I think this is where these wellness courts really tackle the underlining components to help support. So I appreciate the members' commitment or support in principle of these services. But as I also mentioned a little bit earlier, the complexity in the justice system in space, because when you're talking about courts and so forth, we're really having multiple, not just departments engaged, but you're actually engaging with multiple branches of government, and these are independent branches of government that we engage with. So we work collaboratively, and we have a good working relationship, but it's not something the government does independently of our own initiative. So there is certainly a wellness steering committee, a wellness court steering committee, really led, I believe, by representatives in the judiciary and the judges to help inform, and they're working broadly on a sustainability plan for government's consideration. And so that work is ongoing, and this isn't specifically to that Southwest region, but broadly in the province. And the other thing I would just note again, in the short term, if you're saying like right now, today, why don't you just flip the switch? The other piece is right now, today, a lot of resources are, and I don't just mean financial, I mean human resources are really focused on, again, keeping people safe, modernizing the courts for the sake of modernizing, but in response, in particular, to the health and safety needs because of the COVID pandemic. So some of the effort that might have been working on prior to this time last year has been redirected to get us through some of these technical components. And so all of this work is well underway, and the integration between, as you said, the health system, the judicial system, the executive branch, as well as the judicial branch of government, all of those complexities mean it does take a little bit of time to make any individual court come to fruition, but still a pride, I think, of our judicial and justice system.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And how much time do I have left, if you don't mind?
You have 8 minutes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I thank the minister very much for that response, and I guess it's just recognizing that these courts are truly problem-solving courts, and the minister alluded to, it's not to necessarily punish individuals and punish Nova Scotians, and because in instances we see a revolving door that they go through the criminal justice system without getting the actual care or treatment that they may need for their addiction or their substance abuse or their gambling problem. I guess what's like, is there a timeline for the department? Like, I know that the minister spoke previously with my colleague from Pictou West, and I believe it was Pictou West, that said, there's of course the 3 branches of government and work independently, but has the Department of Justice sort of communicated with the judiciary and say, you know, by such date we're looking for a proposal, or has the judiciary said by such date we will have a proposal? Like, I guess that's where I'm looking at right now.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have, I'm not aware of a specific date for the work, other than the work is ongoing. And again, what slightly complicates it is a lot of the work by a lot of similar people are working on other aspects of the modernization effort. So it's not that work isn't being done to help ensure access to justice. It's just from a slightly different perspective right now, but nobody's forgotten. This is still an important part of the justice system.
The honourable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the minister's response, and I honestly hope that there will be an expansion of this very valuable court to the Tri-County region. I do want to pivot with the few moments that remain and speak to a situation that didn't necessarily directly impact my constituency, but the neighboring constituencies. But however, it's many of my constituents felt the issue, and it's regarding the moderate livelihood issue in Clare, and regarding the safety of all those, and you know, I am alive to the fact that DFO has a role and responsibility, the Coast Guard has a responsibility, and as well as our police forces. And in the Clare area, it's the RCMP, and I've seen different photos and read different stories that there's a significant amount of resources that were deployed to that area. There are concerns of things heating up both on and off the water, with warmer weather upcoming. I'm just wondering what the minister's involvement in ensuring that the safety for all is ensured as this issue continues to simmer.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for and to the member for the important question. Operationally, if the member is referring to operationally, if things were to percolate and public safety was to become an issue or concern, operationally and on the ground, that would really fall to the police force, the RCMP, and if depending on the region, potentially municipal forces as well. But fundamentally, the public safety component operationally for ensuring that public safety is directly to the policing agencies. As that rolls up in terms of responding to issues like enhanced resource requests or what have you, if there that aspect of the contract outlines where approvals and things, if necessary, to engage additional resources and things would come into the department and the minister responsible for public safety, myself. But as far as from an operational perspective, that's not my role. It's really to support and work with our policing agencies from a resourcing allocation if needed.
The member with 3 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wondered if the minister has any concerns that have been expressed to him or through the department regarding the situation, whether it be for demand for resources, allocation of resources, or does everything seem to be okay in this regard on this file?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to try to choose my language carefully a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to delve into an area to jeopardize any efforts or works of our policing agencies. So I'll keep it very high level. Suffice to say, the capacity and the ability, and I think our province in the last year has shown how resources, one of the advantages of the RCMP is that they are a national force, so that resources both provincially, they serve us provincially, and are able to redeploy resources within the province very quickly, but also because they are part of a national force. If additional resources are ever required for any reason, there's the ability to quickly mobilize and garnish support from other jurisdictions across the country. So there's one of those advantages of securing those services from a national police force. Again, without getting into details, what I would say is I'm confident in the work and the due diligence of our policing agency and other partners to stay on top of all circumstances that intelligence would suggest may represent a risk to public safety, and that I have confidence in their willingness and ability to prepare for any instances for which they have the capacity or the intelligence to prepare for.
The member with 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I guess with this last minute, I'll again thank the minister for his responses this afternoon. And I too do have confidence in the ability of our police forces and the resources that they have at their disposal to ensure the safety of all. It is frightening situations that have taken place in this part of the province, and it's unfortunate that they're yet to be resolved. But that's beyond the minister's jurisdiction. But I do hope with time that it will come to a peaceful resolution, and I hope if the situation.
Order, please. The time for the PC caucus has expired. We only have 12 minutes left, and I don't know how long the minister is going to take for his closing remarks, and maybe if he can give some indication, might help both the member and myself.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I will defer and use only the amount of time for closing remarks as the member wishes. I just need a few seconds for the resolution. If the member wants me to make other closing remarks, I will do so. But if she wants to use all of her time, I'm welcome to concede that as well.
That's fine, thank you. So as it stands now, we'll go to 5:04 and allow the minister to make his remarks. The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the minister. I wanted to go back to a question I asked before the break because I didn't hear an answer about the design team to reimagine the justice system in Nova Scotia. So the minister said things have changed since last September, and I understand that. And I'm wondering, is that team still working, or is there a different approach being considered?
The Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the design team, to the best of my knowledge, was not kind of officially designed, and is not part of the Department of Justice. So that's why when I referred to the work that we're doing and our priorities and focus on the justice planning for the
You're on mute.
So, sorry about that. Doing the justice plan for the African Nova Scotian and the Indigenous justice plan as outlined in my mandate letter. We have a new office within government now as well, focused on tackling racism and systemic issues in our society. So I think just the underlining all of it, whatever one calls a team or an initiative, I think the fact and fundamentally remains that broadly government direction from the Premier right on down, and I believe this is consistent in both the in all branches of government, a desire and a commitment to educate ourselves, educate our partners in our community, to learn from past behaviors and so forth to inform our path forward to tackle and take down systemic barriers and issues And I mean, here we're talking specifically about justice, but I think broadly in government, you can look at my colleagues' mandate letters. There's a lot of reference and focus, and we know this is a part of our premier and our government's commitment, not just in justice, but across the board.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one last kick at the can here. I recognize the commitment. I mean, I think the former premier's apology was very articulate, relatively well received. I read the mandate letters. I know that this government has expressed a commitment. There were 2 people hired. They had offices. They had a mandate. They had 18 months to set this up. And my question is that project still happening or not? And I guess I'll just add on, in the interest of time, you know, that project itself, as the minister must be aware, came under some fire and was somewhat controversial. And one of the reasons was that the African Nova Scotia Decade for People of African Descent Coalition, DPAD, had in fact much earlier submitted their own African Nova Scotian Justice Institute plan to the department. We also introduced that in the form of a bill. So if the minister can just clarify whether that project continues or not, are those people still under contract with the department or not? I notwithstanding the commitment, that's fine. I appreciate those comments. And will the minister or the department or the new office, who we can't question here, be entertaining DPAD's proposal?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess again, I apologize if you know, previously I wasn't quite clear enough. As I mentioned, the design team wasn't allocated or assigned. So, and when the members asking about those resources, they're not part of this department. So I can't comment on where the resources are, or whether those resources are deployed and what their work would be as part of that, because they're not part of this department and hadn't been part of this department. So that's why when I say I can't speak to it, I can't speak to it because they were never here as part of this department. But as it relates to the DPAD proposal and engagement with that organization, we are definitely engaged. We have received the proposal. It's being reviewed. Engagement is taking place. But from my perspective, from the perspective of the department, Mr. Chair, it's being done per my mandate to establish and develop a broad African Nova Scotian, as well as, and separately, an Indigenous justice plan for the province to set the stage and the path forward. So yes, that specific plan that was referenced has been received by the department. It is being reviewed by the department and engaged with the parties that submitted it to as part of the bigger initiative that my department's undertaking.
Member with under 5 minutes left.
Thank you. I really appreciate the last part of that answer, and I look forward to hearing more. Still mystified by the first part. So if it was never there, where was it and where is it? I'm not getting that answer, but I'm not going to spend more time trying. Following the release of the Street Checks report, the former Minister of Justice issued a directive, which in turn became a moratorium on street checks, which we were pleased to see. There's an exception in the language of that moratorium for police inquiries into suspicious activity. And I know there's been some conversation about whether that does or doesn't reflect a common law standard. This is like a long kind of legal brief kind of conversation. But nonetheless, people are very concerned about it. Our understanding is that the Human Rights Commission has been engaged to review the term, and I'm wondering if the minister can provide an update on that work.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to the question of the human rights, I don't have an update. That is an independent, although they report through they are independent. I'm not aware of the work that they would be doing on that piece, so I can't unfortunately provide an update. But I can advise Mr. Chair, you and my colleagues, that we are engaged on that very question with DPAD and organizations, again, as part of our broad work. And I mean, that's a specific item, but all of that falls under our commitment, my mandate, to move forward and address these systemic issues and make improvements. And that, I assure you, I'm committed to doing.
Member with about 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the minister for a 4-hour estimate period, which is probably a new low record for him, and for for your responsiveness and relative brevity, and I recognize that this is a new department, so thank you both to the minister and to the staff for being responsive, and I look forward to following up on some of the issues we discussed. But with that, we'll tie up and let the minister make a few remarks and read the resolution.
I recognize the minister for closing remarks and presenting the resolution.
So, Mr. Chair, just so I time this appropriately, what is our closing time?
I can unmute 5:05.
So I've got 3 minutes. I can probably clear my throat and prepare. But suffice to say, before I read the resolution, I want to first thank my colleagues, everyone who has participated this afternoon with these estimates discussions. I prefer to refer them, I know, estimate debate, but it really tends to be more discussion. For those that asked questions, but also those who have sit in on the committee listening, and I know the topic of justice is important to us and as members of the legislature, but also our constituents. I'd also, again, be remiss if I didn't refer back, as I did in my opening remarks, to thank all of the staff throughout the Department of Justice. I've only been here for a couple of months, but I've been very welcomed. I feel very welcomed into the department, and I appreciate that very much, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of them to implement our budget commitments, but also on the other priorities defined in my mandate, and ensure we do provide justice in a meaningful way to all citizens. And also, likewise, appreciation to all of our community partners, service providers, and organizations that help us provide true justice to the citizens of Nova Scotia, recognizing we have work to do. And with that, Mr. Chair, I move that it be resolved that a sum not exceeding $392,342,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Department of Justice pursuant to the estimate. Be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $957,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Review Office pursuant to the estimate. Be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $2,857,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Human Rights Commission pursuant to the estimate. And be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $427,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect to the Nova Scotia Police Complaints Commissioner pursuant to the estimate. And resolved that a sum not exceeding $26,633,000 be granted to the Lieutenant Governor to defray expenses in respect of the Public Prosecution Service in pursuant to the estimate. And those are all of the resolutions pursuant to the department as well as our partner organizations. Mr. Chair.
You're on mute, Mr. Baines.
Shall the resolution stand?
Stand.
The resolution stand. Again, thank you to the minister. I'm sure you're in shock because this was so short, as you're normally accustomed to having a week in the chamber. But we appreciate you and your staff being here today. The good news that I mentioned last night, we're down to one more day of estimates, and we'll be getting together again on Monday. Don't know what time, same place and same station. So everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. We stand adjourned.
Mr. Chair.
No, don't, we've got committee of the whole, I think. Don't leave.